I remember it was raining lightly that morning. The kind of rain that doesn't want to bother anyone, just enough to draw fine lines on the car window. I got to the office earlier than usual, like every day for the past 20 years. The security guard greeted me with a familiar nod, but I noticed something strange in his expression, like he was trying to avoid my eyes. The sixth floor, the engineering department, wasn't lit up yet. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, my hand holding a still warm cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, just the way I liked it. Everything seemed normal until the desk phone rang. The voice of the director's assistant came through, steady and distant. "Ethan, please come up to the 8th floor conference room in 10 minutes. I didn't ask why. There was no need. It felt like my chest went still for a beat. Like when you spot a small crack in the ceiling and then realize the whole thing is about to come down. I walked into the conference room. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the long meeting table, chairs lined up neatly. Only 3 people were there: the CEO, Mr. Charles, the VP of Engineering, Linda, and someone I never expected to see there today, Ryan, Linda's nephew, a fresh graduate who had interned under me just a few months ago. Charles nodded hello, but his eyes darted away. Linda took a sip of her tea, saying nothing. Right then, I knew something in my life was about to be cut away, coldly and cleanly. Charles was the one who spoke first. "Ethan, the company is entering a crucial transition phase. We deeply appreciate your contributions over the past 2 decades. But," he hesitated, as if searching for less cruel words, "we need a fresh perspective, a different approach, and Ryan here will be taking over as lead engineer." There was no noise, no arguments, just the ticking of the second hand on the wall clock, marking each beat. I looked at Charles, then at Ryan. The kid couldn't meet my gaze, just looked down, his hands twisting a notepad, as if trying to knead guilt into a different shape. I said nothing. Didn't ask why, didn't ask, "Is this fair?" Those questions didn't need answers. I nodded, then asked simply, "When?" Linda looked up, replying, "Effective next week. You'll have 5 days to assist with the handover process." I stood up. The air conditioning felt cold on the back of my neck. With each step out of that room, I felt like I was peeling off layers of my own skin, not because it hurt, but because I wasn't allowed to keep them anymore. I packed my things late that afternoon. A few colleagues came by to pat my shoulder. A few others watched me through the crack in the door. Their eyes held a mix of pity and relief that it wasn't them. I drove home in silence. The rain was still falling, heavier now, thicker, as if the sky itself couldn't bear something that had broken that day. My 2-story house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The maple trees out front had started turning, yellow leaves sticking to the windshield as I turned off the engine. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked in. She didn't run to greet me like she used to, didn't ask if my day was okay. Just turned with a casual smile. "You're home?" I nodded. The refrigerator door closed softly, like a blink. She carried her smoothie upstairs, leaving me at the dining table, where 2 place settings were laid out but untouched. I noticed her phone lying face down on the table. That wasn't like her at all. Sarah always left her phone face up, like she had nothing to hide. A little later, I went upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I knocked gently, then pushed it open. Sarah was lying on the bed, watching something on her iPad, headphones in. I sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at her. After a long moment, I said, "I left my job." Sarah pulled out one earbud. "What?" I repeated, slower. "I'm not with the company anymore. They replaced me." She blinked, then replied after a few seconds, "So, what are you going to do now?" No hug. No "I'm sorry." No anger or sympathy. Just a question, colder than the rain outside. I stood up and walked out of the room. Each step on the wooden staircase sounded like a hammer blow, marking the end of a chapter one once believed was solid. I sat alone in the kitchen, watching the light cast the shadow of my hand on the wooden table. The calluses, the stiff joints from years as an engineer. Everything I had poured into the company, into this family, now felt like something someone had just slapped an expired label on. I didn't sleep that night. I lay listening to the clock tick, listening to the rain beat against the eaves, listening to faint sounds from the next room, where the woman I loved was giggling softly with someone on the phone. I wasn't angry. I didn't cry. I just felt cold. A kind of cold that didn't come from the weather, but from the truth. And the truth was, no one, not even the person closest to you, stays forever when you're no longer useful. The mask falls off. No blood, just silence. A long, thick silence, clearer than any words I'd ever heard in my life. And that's how it started. Not with shouting, not with a tear-soaked betrayal, but with a quiet awakening. When you realize you'd been pushed to the edge of my own life without even realizing when it happened. There were nights I lay in the dark, unaware of how many hours had passed. The luminous clock hands on the wall still crept forward slowly, but in my head, time seemed frozen at the moment I walked out of that conference room. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not a relative, not a friend. Truthfully, I didn't have anyone close enough to call at a time like that. My whole life had been wrapped up in my work and in Sarah. And now, both were empty spaces. Sarah never asked about me leaving my job again. She just carried on with her schedule as if nothing had changed. Waking up early, meticulous makeup, the scent of her perfume drifting down the stairs each morning as she left. I'd sit there, at the dining table, stirring my cooling coffee, listening to the click of her heels pass by, without even a glance back. I started noticing the small things. She no longer left her phone on the table when she came home, or if she did, it was always face down. Text messages arriving late at night. A quick glance before hiding the phone in the pocket of her robe. The way she'd smile faintly while texting, or the vague disinterest when I asked, "Are you tired?" I didn't want to suspect. But my trust had been fractured since the day I heard that chair scrape behind me on the 8th floor. One night, I walked past Sarah's home office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the glow of her phone screen lit up her face. She was texting, lips pursed, then a faint smile. I knocked lightly, and in an instant, she blanked the screen, looking up. "What is it?" I asked. "Can't sleep?" Sarah shrugged. "Just replying to a client message." I nodded and walked away, but the feeling in my chest was no longer suspicion. It was certainty. She was hiding something. And I knew, if I kept silent, I'd go mad from the unspoken things. I started piecing together the fragments. One afternoon when Sarah was out meeting a partner, I went into her office. A stack of documents sat uncategorized on her desk, and next to it was a cream-colored envelope, the kind of high-quality paper clients often used for invitations or handwritten notes. Inside was a birthday card, but not addressed to Sarah. It was for Marcus. The handwritten message was soft, flowing. "Hope you have a wonderful day, just like our nights together." I stood there, frozen. The feeling wasn't explosive anger. No, it was a kind of paralysis, like someone slowly squeezing your heart, letting you breathe, letting you live, but feeling nothing anymore. Sarah walked in not long after. She flinched slightly seeing me in the room, but kept her composure. "What are you looking for?" I held up the card, saying nothing. She looked at me for a moment, then down at the desk, picking up her phone. "Don't go through my things. I'm tired. We're living in two different worlds now. And maybe it should be that way." I didn't reply. I just left the room, walked downstairs, and went straight outside like someone needing to breathe different air, far from the smell of pretense spreading through that house. From that day on, I started leaving the house every late afternoon. I went to a small wood shop on the outskirts of town, about a 20-minute drive away. It was a place I'd learned furniture making as a young man, before going into engineering. The old owner was getting on in years, but still kept the doors open for people who wanted to keep their hands busy. Walter, his name, greeted me with a slow handshake. "Come on in. Don't need to say anything, long as you don't break anything." He chuckled softly. I nodded, beginning afternoons lost in the saw, the chisel, and the sound of wood splitting under the plane. I didn't know what I was looking for there. Maybe the noise, to fill the silences at home. Maybe the smell of wood, to overpower the scent of Sarah's perfume late at night. Or maybe, simply, I needed a place to prove I could still create something, even if it was just a chair, a cabinet, not just a man who'd been replaced and betrayed. Once, I tried calling Sarah late one night, just to ask if she'd eaten dinner. The phone rang 3 times, then cut off. No text back. No explanation. I quietly put the phone down. I started jotting down a few lines each evening, in a small notebook I brought to the woodshop. Not to keep a diary, but to keep my thoughts from dissolving. I used to think love was holding on. Now I see. Maybe love is letting go, letting the other person be free to hurt you. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but today I'm still breathing. And that's enough. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't confide. The fewer words I spoke, the more I felt I could hold on to what little was left of myself. The long nights continued. The house became 2 parallel worlds. Me downstairs, Sarah upstairs. We crossed paths with meaningless questions. Are you taking the car today? I put the laundry in the machine. But no one really lingered in the other's gaze anymore. One time, returning from the woodshop, I found Sarah asleep on the sofa, her phone still open to a text message. I didn't dare read it, but the name displayed on the screen was Marcus. I looked at her for a long moment, then turned away, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I was too tired to keep demanding someone stay by my side. I went up to my study, opened the notebook, and wrote a single line. There are long nights without sleep. Not because you can't forget someone else, but because you haven't found yourself again yet. And that was me. A man sitting in a room filled with the smell of wood dust and varnish, but hollow inside like a house abandoned for too long. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew. I couldn't stay still any longer. Not in that house. Not in that old life. And perhaps not forever in these long, sleepless nights. One evening, as I was planing strips of wood for a small cabinet, sleeves rolled up, sweat clinging to my forehead, old Walter came over. He placed a steaming mug of black coffee beside me, then sat down on an old wooden stool opposite me. Neither of us spoke for a while, just the drone of the planer and the smell of fresh wood filling the air. I stopped working, glanced at him. He wasn't looking at me, his gaze fixed on the workshop floor, dappled with yellow light. After a moment, he spoke, his voice slow like the wind rustling through late autumn trees. You know, I went through a time like this myself. Betrayed, left behind, thought I'd never get back up. I didn't react, just lowered my head slightly, my hand still turning a small piece of wood as if it could help me hide from the conversation unfolding. But Walter kept talking, as if he didn't need anyone to listen. She left me for a younger man, an old business partner of mine, took the house, the friends, and my trust with her. He let out a soft, dry laugh, like a winter night without a fire. I sat in this workshop for months, hands busy but mind empty. Then one day, a stranger, the priest from the church nearby, stopped by to order a small cross. He gave me an old Bible, said if I didn't have faith, at least I should have something to hold on to so I wouldn't completely fall apart. Walter turned to look at me. His eyes, creased with wrinkles, shone strangely bright in the dim yellow light. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, and placed it gently on the workbench. I'm not telling you to believe. I'm no preacher. But if there's a night you don't know what to hold on to, try reading a page. Just one page. I looked at the book. It was small, the leather cover a dark brown, its corners worn smooth, like something someone had carried for a long time, over long distances. I didn't pick it up right away, just nodded my thanks, then went back to planing the wood. When I got home, I placed the book on a shelf near the front door. Didn't open it, didn't touch it, just walked past it every day like some harmless object unrelated to my life. But that night, Sarah came home late, the click of her heels echoing up the stairs before fading away. I sat alone in the living room, the yellow lamp casting long shadows on the wall. It wasn't raining outside, but there was wind. Wind whistling through the old window frames, making a sound like a stifled sigh. I sat there for a long time, feeling like I was sinking, not in water, but in something thick and heavy, a kind of darkness that swallowed all sound and emotion. I looked towards the shelf. The book was still there, silent, patient. I walked over and picked it up. My hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but because I knew, once I opened it, I was crossing a new boundary. I sat back down, opened the first page, then flipped through a few more until my eyes landed on a sentence in bold print. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. I read that sentence over and over. I don't know how many times. Each time, my heart seemed to beat a little slower. Not because I instantly felt saved, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt like my soul had found a place to stand, even if only temporarily. It wasn't a miraculous night where light flooded the room and I broke down weeping in prayer like in the movies. No, I just sat there, silent, eyes fixed on the words, feeling as if someone had just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're not worthless yet. There's still a way." From that day on, I started bringing the book to the woodshop. Didn't read for hours, just a passage each morning. Read, then worked. Some days, I just placed it next to my coffee mug, like a friend who didn't need to say anything. Walter never asked if I was reading it. He just looked into my eyes each morning, then gave a very slight nod. One afternoon, While I was drilling holes for the wooden cabinet I was designing myself, Walter came over, handed me a rag to wipe my hands, and sat down beside me. He said, "You know what helped me get through it? It wasn't forgiving the ones who left me. It was stopping the need for them to come back and see my pain. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed to keep living decently." I listened, saying nothing. But that evening, I wrote a line in my little notebook. "I don't need them to know I'm hurting. I just need to know I'm healing." Perhaps that was the first time I used the word healing in my thoughts. Before, I always saw myself as burned out, left behind. But it turned out, even in the darkness, there was a whisper, audible only if you were willing to be silent and listen. That whisper didn't come from anyone else. It came from the deepest part of myself, where a little light remained, however small, still enough to remind me I was still alive and I could still start again. I don't believe in miracles, but I believed in the words I read. In the mornings spent sawing wood beside a man who had lost everything but still held kindness in his eyes. And I believe that in the darkest corners of life, sometimes all it takes is the right whisper at the right time, enough to keep a person from falling completely. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer felt like I was in freefall. I felt like I was standing. And though I didn't know where I was going yet, at least I was ready to take a step. Every morning, I woke early, even before the sun touched the roof. I didn't need an alarm. My sleep was light now, like a thin layer of dust, easily disturbed by a gust of wind outside. I'd make coffee, the slow drip kind, quietly listening to each drop fall into the cup. Then I'd sit by the window, open Walter's old Bible, and read a short passage. Didn't need to understand everything, just needed to read, to keep my mind from being filled with other, darker thoughts. The words were like faint light filtering through the window, weak but real. After that, I'd head to the woodshop. In the car, I often carried a few sketches, not of tables or chairs, but technical designs I'd dreamt up back at the old company. The ones I submitted to management only to have them brushed aside. My papers shoved in a drawer, my ideas gathering dust, as if they came from someone not young enough to be trusted. Now, I pulled them out again, not to convince anyone, but to see if I still believed in them enough to spend time on them. Each day, I'd pick a detail, refine it, rewrite a little. No pressure, no expectations, just doing it because I knew I still could. The woodshop was the only place I didn't have to hide any part of myself. The smell of varnish, the sound of the cutting machine, the low murmur of classical music from the radio in the morning, it all blended into a familiar rhythm. There, I didn't need to pretend to be strong. I just needed to keep working. Walter left me alone. He didn't interfere, didn't offer advice. Sometimes he'd just hand me a glass of water or remind me to wear ear protection when the saw ran too long. His quiet, persistent presence taught me more than any words could. Home was the opposite. Every time I walked in, I felt like I was stepping onto a stage. No one was acting dramatically, but the air was always thick, as if everyone was wearing a mask. Sarah didn't ask where I went each day, nor did she share her schedule. But I knew, from the way she often wore meticulous makeup, from the whispered phone calls out on the balcony, the suppressed laughter, that her relationship with Marcus was ongoing. I didn't follow her, didn't interrogate. All the proof I needed was present in the distance between our chairs at meals, the words no longer spoken, the touch that had vanished long ago. I asked, "Are you going out?" Sarah turned, hesitated slightly, then said, "Client's birthday party. I won't be home for dinner." I nodded, about to walk away, but then I asked something I hadn't thought I would. "Do you remember what you said the first time you wore that dress?" Sarah blinked. "I don't remember." I gave a small smile. "You said you chose it so I'd be proud to introduce you to my colleagues at the launch event." I paused, then added, "And that day, I really was proud." Sarah said nothing, just turned her face away. I didn't wait for an answer. I understood. It wasn't that she didn't remember, but that she no longer wanted to. The next morning, I returned to the woodshop, bringing my latest drawing. As I was leaning over, carefully measuring proportions, Walter walked up, looked for a moment, then gently patted my shoulder. "This design, it's worth putting into production." I smiled but said nothing. I didn't dare believe it, but his words felt like a tiny spark in a dry field. Someone still believed in me, even if it was just in a small design on paper and wood. Time passed. Sarah drifted further away. Some nights, she didn't come home. Some days I didn't ask, because I knew asking wouldn't change anything. One day, I heard that her spa was being investigated for using products with unknown origins, products introduced by Marcus. Sarah came home, pale. She sat down at the table. No makeup, no high heels, no perfume. Just a woman trying to hold on to something already shattered. I made her a cup of hot tea. She didn't drink it. Didn't look at me either. I can handle it, she said, as if reassuring herself. I said nothing. Didn't nod. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction. No pain either. Just detachment. As if I were watching a scene in a movie, where people realize every choice has a price. That night, I went to my room, opened my technical notebook, and continued drawing a circuit segment for the design I'd once had rejected. I worked late, hands stained with ink, eyes blurry but not from tears. But because finally, I felt like I was moving forward, slowly, but with direction. Amidst the wreckage, I wasn't trying to pick up every piece. I only chose what was still intact: patience, hands that still knew how to work, and a flicker of faith just beginning to sprout, to start again. I no longer hoped Sarah would return to how she was. No longer wished Marcus would disappear. No longer expected the old company to realize they were wrong. I just hoped I was strong enough not to need those things anymore. And it seemed, each morning when I opened my eyes, I found myself a little closer to that. That March, the air still held a chill. The morning wind cut through my jacket like a reminder. Winter wasn't ready to leave, and I wasn't ready for any kind of new beginning either. But then, something unexpected arrived. In an email with a very simple subject line: "Want to talk about your design?" The sender was a young engineer named Thomas, working for a rising tech startup. He said he'd stumbled upon a design I shared anonymously on an engineering forum and wanted to invite me to consult on a special project. I read the message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't believe it. For years, I'd been considered obsolete, an old-timer clinging to outdated systems. And now, a younger generation was actively seeking me out. Not for my reputation, not for connections, simply because they saw value in what I created. It took me almost a week to reply, not out of pride, but because I needed to be sure I was ready to step out of the safe woodshop I'd retreated into for so long. Finally, I agreed. No complicated contracts, no binding demands, just working together to build a more practical, efficient, and fair solution for automation systems. I met with Thomas's team twice a week. Initially, it was just feedback, then I started getting involved more deeply in the design. The team was young, enthusiastic, and most importantly, they listened. They didn't cut me off with phrases like, "That idea is too old," or "That's outdated." They asked why, they took notes, and they iterated until they found the best solution. One day, Thomas looked at me, eyes shining. "I've never worked with anyone as patient as you, Ethan. We're learning so much from how you approach problems." I said nothing, just smiled. Inside, something had quietly opened up. Like a small door behind me I thought had been locked forever. The project was more successful than anyone expected. After 4 months of testing, the new system was contracted by a major factory chain in another state. Thomas called me that night, his voice choked with joy. "They agreed, Ethan. They chose us." That night, I sat alone in the woodshop. No one around. Just the sound of the wind whistling softly through cracks in the wall and the smell of pine, still warm from being cut that afternoon. I didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. I just gently closed my eyes and whispered a thank you in my head. Not thanking anyone specific, just thanking life for not forgetting me. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a national engineering conference, where companies, experts, and engineers from all over gathered. I hesitated, but Thomas said, "You don't have to do anything special. Just tell the story of the journey you took." I stepped onto the stage that day in my old suit, freshly pressed. The lights shone directly in my eyes, the auditorium silent. I didn't start with numbers. I talked about being replaced, about being cast aside as if a lifetime of work was just an expired commodity. I talked about the long nights in the woodshop, about hands that once trembled holding old blueprints. I talked about Walter, about the Bible, and about how I learned to trust again, not others, but myself. When I finished, the room remained silent. Then, a sustained round of applause broke out. I wasn't used to that, but I noticed something. In the back rows, I saw a familiar face, Ryan. He was sitting next to a man who looked like a representative from my old company. Ryan wasn't clapping, just staring at me, eyes wide, not with surprise, but with unease. I met his gaze for a fraction of a second, then looked away. Not to show superiority, but because I no longer needed to win against anyone. After the presentation, as I was preparing to leave the hall, someone approached me. It was Linda, my former VP, the one who brought Ryan in to replace me. She spoke briefly. "I didn't expect to see you here," I replied. "I didn't expect to see you still sitting comfortably in that position either." She didn't get angry, didn't smile, just nodded and walked away. I didn't follow, didn't need to continue that conversation, because everything that needed to be said, I had already said, through my work, through my value, through my very presence there that day. As I walked out of the hall, a former colleague from operations, someone I'd helped on a project years ago, came up to me. He shook my hand, gripping it tightly. "Ethan," I never dared to say, "but when you were replaced, our whole department was in shock. We didn't have the power to speak up, and it haunted me. But now thank you for not breaking." I couldn't help it. I patted his shoulder, gently, like a brief hug. Some things people don't say when they have the chance, but when enough time passes, the words find their moment. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I drove back to the workshop, turned on the dim yellow light, and sat down on the wooden chair I'd made myself. On the table lay the very first design I'd ever had rejected. I opened it. The ink lines had faded slightly with time, but the structure was still clear, solid. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Ryan, not to Sarah, not to the old company, because I knew I still had value. And you can't replace a human being with just a list of skills or blood relations. I hadn't won against anyone, but I wasn't losing anymore either. And sometimes, that's enough to keep living. With the kind of peace you find on a windless afternoon, sunlight filtering gently through leaves, quiet and enduring. I returned home on a Saturday afternoon. The sky wasn't rainy, wasn't sunny, just covered in a thin layer of gray, as if it hadn't decided whether to be sad or calm. The old wooden door creaked open, a familiar sound. Sarah wasn't home. The kitchen was quiet, the air still holding the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the herbal tea she'd left behind. I put my keys down on the counter, walked straight into the bedroom, and opened the small drawer beside the wardrobe. I took out a wooden box, simple, unadorned, just something I'd made with my own hands one afternoon years ago. Inside were the small things I'd kept out of habit. An old photo of Sarah smiling brightly under Christmas lights, a piece of a card where she'd written, "Thank you for always believing in me," and my wedding ring, taken off weeks ago, but never far from sight. I sat down on the bed, the ring resting in the palm of my hand. Light from the window reflected a faint, dull gleam on the surface, tarnished by years. There was a small scratch I'd once meant to polish out, but then forgot. Now, I didn't want to do anything, because that scratch, that imperfection, was the truth of the years we lived together. I went downstairs and carefully placed the ring on the kitchen counter. Beside it, I left a small note, written briefly in clear, steady handwriting. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I need to move forward without carrying resentment. From today, I won't be here anymore. But I hope you find your true self again, if you still want to look." I didn't rush to leave. I poured myself a glass of water, drank it slowly, my eyes scanning the kitchen, the place where I used to fix appliances, make coffee for both of us every morning, argue over trivial things like how to fold kitchen towels or when to turn on the heat. Everything was still there, in its place, but it wasn't mine anymore. I carried a backpack containing a few changes of clothes, a notebook, and Walter's Bible. Didn't need much. I had learned to live simply, both in my luggage and in my mind. I walked past the staircase, looking up towards the bedroom one last time. The door was closed. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking from the living room. 3 o'clock. 3 in the afternoon. Years ago, at this time, we might have been watching a movie together or heading out to the grocery store. Now, each lived in a world the other could no longer enter. I walked out of the house without looking back. That afternoon, I checked into a small motel near the woodshop. The owner, Mrs. Helen, was a kind, quiet widow. She didn't ask why a man nearing 50 was renting a room so silently. She just gave me the key, mentioned breakfast times, and left me alone. That night, lying on the simple bed, listening to the gentle whir of the ceiling fan, the feeling of not being in my own home didn't disturb me as much as I thought it would. On the contrary, it felt like shedding something, as if leaving the old place also removed layers of dust that had settled on my heart. The next morning, I had a missed call from Sarah. I didn't call back. But that afternoon, while working at the woodshop, I saw her standing at the gate. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair messy, no makeup. She wasn't the woman who walked confidently in high heels anymore. She was Sarah, raw and trembling. As if for the first time, she had nothing left to hide behind. I walked out, standing a careful distance away. She looked at me, her eyes unfocused. "You read the note and left, just like that? Is it really over?" I looked directly into her eyes. "How long did I not leave, Sarah?" I stayed through the silence, the hurt, the effort that went unnoticed. And then one day I realized, if I stayed any longer, I wouldn't be myself anymore. She was silent. I saw her lips move, about to say something, but then she just lowered her head. In her hand, the wedding ring still lay. Not worn, not clutched tightly, just resting there limply as if she didn't know what to do with it either. I said, without bitterness, without anger, "That ring isn't a punishment. It's a farewell. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Forgiveness is so both of us can be free." Sarah nodded slightly, as if she finally understood. She turned and walked slowly towards her car. I stood there, watching her go, without regret, without relief. Just an empty space opening up, no longer a wound, but room to breathe. That evening, I went back to my motel room, sat by the window, and picked up my notebook. I wrote, "Some goodbyes don't need a slamming door. Just a ring placed on a counter. And one person willing to walk away, without waiting to be called back." I didn't know how long I'd stay here. Didn't know where I'd go next. But one thing I was sure of. From this day forward, every step I took was my own. No longer for anyone else. No longer proving anything. And no longer needing to win or keep anyone beside me. I had put down the ring. And with it, I put down an old life, where I had hoped, endured, and finally, chosen to let go. Not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to understand. Real love doesn't cling. It releases, in peace and in freedom. In the weeks after leaving the house, I lived slower than I'd ever allowed myself to before. Waking up each morning without an alarm clock, without the sound of someone else's hurried footsteps in the hall, without the two-person breakfast table heavy with silence. Just the thin light filtering through the motel window, the smell of toast from the kitchen downstairs, and the chirping of birds from the trees out back. I still went to the woodshop regularly. But now, I didn't go to escape. I went as a comfortable habit, like returning to an old porch to let damp thoughts air dry. Walter still sat in his usual corner, sometimes doing nothing, just reading the paper and listening to the radio. We didn't need many words. Between two men who had known loss, silence was the most comfortable thing. I spent time designing a small desk for the young child of one of the workers at the shop. He couldn't afford new furniture, so I told him, "Let me make it. No charge." He hesitated, but I just smiled. Consider it an investment in someone who might take my place someday. From that comment, I started thinking about something bigger. An idea crept in, initially just a faint glimmer in my mind, then growing clearer, starting a small scholarship fund. Nothing huge, just a few $100s a month for kids in the area whose circumstances resembled my own childhood. Any kid showing real effort, I'd lend a hand. I didn't name the fund after myself. Didn't hold a launch ceremony. I just entrusted the idea to Mrs. Helen, the motel owner, who had been an elementary school teacher for over 30 years. I told her, "If you know a kid who's truly trying but short on funds for school, let me know." She just nodded, her eyes showing a flicker of emotion, but she didn't say thank you. And I knew that was the best way to know she understood and would walk alongside me in this. One Sunday, I went to the church. Not for the service. Just because I liked sitting in that space when it was empty. When the light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting slow-moving patches of red, blue, and yellow across the long wooden pews and the floor. I usually sat in the third row from the back, near the window. Didn't pray. Didn't read the Bible. Just sat quietly, listening to the wind through the cracks in the door, the sound of someone playing piano in another room. Sometimes I'd only stay 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. But every time I left, my heart felt lighter than when I walked in. And then, something happened. A small thing, but it etched itself into my memory like a quiet imprint. That day, as I was leaving the church, a young man was waiting by the door. His hair was messy, his shirt buttoned wrong, and his eyes were swollen like he'd just finished crying. He looked at me, hesitant. Then he approached. "Are you Ethan Miller?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded, surprised but calm. I am. Can I help you? He swallowed hard, then held out his phone. The screen showed an article, the one I'd shared on the engineering forum, talking about my journey leaving the company, leaving my family, and finding myself again piece by piece. He said, I read it 3 weeks ago, when I was standing on the bridge, ready to end everything. I froze. I just lost my scholarship. My parents told me I was a burden. My girlfriend left without a word. I thought, I probably had no reason left to live. Until I read your post. He gave a weak smile, but tears fell again. You didn't preach anything. You just told your story. But I saw myself in it. And I thought, if someone could hit bottom and still keep going, maybe I should try one more time. I didn't know what to say. I just placed my hand on his shoulder, lightly, the way Walter had done with me. My mind wasn't filled with lessons or advice. Just one repeating thought. Turns out, what I did, someone heard it. He left soon after. Didn't leave his name. Didn't ask for contact info. But I didn't need that. Because I knew, even unnamed, some seeds I'd sown were quietly sprouting somewhere in the world. That evening, I sat by the motel window, the streetlight casting a pale stripe on the wall. I opened my notebook and wrote a short line. We don't need to save the whole world. Just stand still, be honest, and plant one seed of kindness at the right time. That's enough. I thought about everything I'd been through. Loss, betrayal, loneliness, and then the small things, like a revived design, a young hand on my shoulder, a cup of coffee from Walter, or an unspoken look of gratitude from Mrs. Helen. They all added up. Not grand, but real and enduring. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew if each day I could still wake up early, still see the morning light through the window, still hear the sound of wood in the workshop, and still sit quietly in a corner of the church, then I would keep planting. Without a name, without noise, just at the right time. Because sometimes a life is healed not by a dramatic turnaround, but by silent, persistent seeds of kindness sown all the way through. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sky was crystal clear, not a cloud in sight. A gentle breeze rustling the leaves on the trees out back, making them whisper like an old song. I made a cup of coffee, then folded my notebook neatly and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Today, I wasn't going to the workshop, nor stopping by the church. I wanted to go somewhere else, a place I'd often passed quietly over the years, but never stopped long enough to sit down. The small hill behind town. It wasn't a tourist spot or a famous destination. Just a low, wild grassy hill, dotted with wildflowers and small purple blooms. There was an old wooden bench someone had placed there long ago, its paint peeling, the seat warped and cracked by time. I used to think it would break if anyone sat on it. But no, it still stood there, silent like a gatekeeper with no one left to wait for. I sat down. The coffee was still warm, steam rising lazily in the soft sunlight. From here, you could see the whole small town below, red-tiled roofs, the asphalt road curving like a silver ribbon through the valley. Cars looked like tiny toy models, and people, if visible at all, were just slow-moving dots, indistinct. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an old design sketch. It was the first one I ever submitted to the company, back when I was a young engineer, still believing that just doing good work meant everyone would see it. I looked at the straight pencil lines, the meticulous hand-drawn symbols from before software took over. Every line held a version of me, a version hungry for recognition, for acceptance, for someone to say, you deserve this. But now, I didn't need that anymore. Not because I no longer wanted to be seen, but because I had learned to see myself first. I folded the design carefully, like a keepsake, then looked out towards the distance. No human sounds, just the wind, and the call of a lone bird somewhere in the vast sky. I used to think I needed someone to walk with me to the end of the road. A partner, a colleague, a mentor. I used to think that without someone, I'd be empty, meaningless. But now, sitting here, in this perfect stillness, I felt full. Not full of bright or spectacular things, but full of experiences that no longer caused pain. Full of the long days I had survived without abandoning myself. I had lost my job, lost the person I loved, lost faith in what once felt like foundations. But I hadn't lost compassion. I hadn't lost my dreams. I hadn't lost the ability to get back up. And because of that, I still had everything that truly mattered. On that worn wooden bench, I whispered something to myself, so quietly only I could hear. I've come further than I ever thought I could. No one answered. No one needed to. I sat a while longer. When the sun climbed higher, I stood up, brushed the dust from my clothes, and turned to walk back down the hill, carrying nothing except gratitude for the things that once broke me, because they were the very things that made me the man strong enough to know. I didn't need anyone to stay to know I was already enough. And inside me, a quietness like a blank page, ready to be written on, no longer to prove anything, but simply to record a life that had truly begun. Nearing 50, in a body that had known exhaustion, with a soul learning to trust again. No need to win, no need to hold on, no need to prove, just keep walking, on legs that once trembled and now knew how to stand firm without needing anyone to hold their hand. If you're still listening right up to this moment, then maybe you've also walked through long, sleepless nights, stood at the threshold of silence and wondered, am I really breaking, or have I just not learned how to piece myself back together yet? I don't know where you are on your journey. Maybe you were just pushed out of a position you poured your heart into. Maybe the person you trusted most just turned their back without explanation. Or maybe, like the old me, you're sitting alone in a dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering what tomorrow will bring. I'm not here to say everything will be okay. I can only say you're not alone. And sometimes, just hearing that from someone who walked through the darkness long enough is enough to keep a flicker of light alive inside you a little longer. I didn't retaliate against anyone. I didn't make anyone kneel and apologize. But I survived. I stood up. I rebuilt my life from the fragments, with hands that seemed unwanted, with a tiny seed of faith someone placed in my palm when I had nothing left to hold. If this story touched something in you, please share it. Send it to someone who is struggling. Let them know that healing doesn't have to be loud. It comes from quiet actions, from a ring placed down, an old design redrawn, a thank you no one hears but is spoken anyway. And if you feel this is a journey worth spreading further, you can leave a thank you, a comment, or perhaps a small super thanks. Every seed you sow, even unnamed, will be received by someone. I believe that in this life, no act of kindness is ever meaningless. And if you're still searching for a way out of the darkness, remember, sometimes God doesn't shout. He only whispers. But if you're quiet enough, you will hear him. Thank you for walking this path with me. And if, someday, you meet someone who is lost, don't try to pull them out of the ravine. Just sit beside them and whisper, I've been there too, because maybe you will be their light.